All right, next we have errors which I consider purely logical errors. They're based purely on an error in the logical connection between, for example, a reason and an argument or claim based on that reason. If you remember a syllogism is a statement like X is true, Y is true, therefore Z is true. Common kind is begging a question or loaded assertion. Or circular reason or arguments. So imagine, for example, somebody who doesn't believe in evolution for purely religious reasons and believes in an alternate religious view and wants to force public schools to present their view as legitimate alongside the scientific theory of evolution. And so they might say, well, since evolution is a theory, it's never been proven. That's incorrect. We'll talk about later. Public schools should also teach other theories of origins. Well, that's making a lot of false assumptions that you haven't proven. One is the fact that you can't argue against evolution because it's accepted as a scientific fact. And two, a religious view of origins is not scientifically valid. It's not valid in the science classroom. And I'm not saying there's necessarily a contradiction between religion and science in this area. I'm just saying you can be religious and still believe in science, no problem. But you can't use that because you're making an unproven assumption that, oh, my religious views have a scientific validity when it doesn't. Are you going to listen to this liar, or are you going to convict him like you should? Well, maybe he's a liar, but you need to prove that first before you make an appeal to convict this liar and send the liar to jail. Either or, kind of or black and white, or false dilemma, or false dichotomy. Hear this in politics a lot. Just because you're criticizing your country doesn't mean you hate it. But sometimes people are criticized as not patriotic. You want to criticize America? Well, why don't you leave it? Well, I'm criticizing not America, but problems I see with my country because I want my country to be better. And maybe people who are liberal or progressive love their country just as much as conservative people, perhaps in a somewhat different way, because they are committed to certain, principles behind it. If you reject socialism, you're a fascist. Well, no. Socialism is kind of a broad term, and just because you reject socialism doesn't mean that you're a bad person. Just because you accept socialism doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's either or. These things are complex. Different kinds of capitalism, socialism, they're complex. If you don't like our capitalist system, you must be some kind of a communist and you should leave. No, it's just that we want to make it better. Loaded question or complex question. It's a question that falsely assumes something is true. Famous example. Okay, answer yes or no. Have you stopped beating your wife? Have you stopped beating your wife? If you answer no, you're still beating her. If you answer yes, oh, so you used to beat her. Okay. Either way you answer, you're in trouble. How long have you been hanging around associating with mafia types, organized crime types? I'm making the assumption that you have been. Maybe you haven't. How long have you been cheating on your taxes? Making the assumption that you have. Next one, something that doesn't follow, and this can maybe overlap with some of the other fallacies sometimes. Non sequitur is Latin, meaning it does not follow. So you make a statement that doesn't logically follow from what was said before. So sometimes, maybe in a debate or an interview, a politician is asked a question and the response is not relevant. It's not related to the question, but they like to do this. I'm going to vote for him for senator because he has the best run campaign. Maybe he has a good campaign, it's run efficiently. That doesn't mean he's qualified to be senator. I'm going to buy an Intel computer because they have the best market share. right now Intel is not the best. I don't know if you've heard the news, but AMD is starting to kick Intel's butt. AMD stuff now is better. Intel still has a better market share, but I would rather buy an AMD because right now they're making the better stuff. I don't care if Intel has a better market share. I think AMD is a better product. There's no connection. Just because they have a better market share doesn't mean that they're better. Microsoft and Windows have the biggest market share, but I think they're crap. I would certainly not want to buy that stuff. Just because they have the biggest market share because of their advertising and maybe because of their business practices, 30 years of unethical business practices and heavy pressure and monopoly. Comment on the obvious. This is kind of similar. You don't really answer the question, you just assert that, okay, you just say something obvious to appeal to people, but it's not really answering the question. Let's say a candidate is talking about the drug problem, the problem of drugs in the country, and the person is asked a question, okay, why do you think your particular programs, your ideas are the best way to solve the drug problem? And the politician answers not by answering the question, by saying, well, this drug problem is serious. If you don't do anything about the drug problem, a lot of people are going to continue to suffer. Okay, yeah, that's true. You have stated an obvious claim, something that's obvious, maybe an obvious fact, but it doesn't answer the question, why is your program the best? Why is your program going to work when others haven't? They have simply commented on the obvious. Slippery slope, that's kind of creating this false impression that they've got the slope, and if you start walking down the slope, you're going to slide and slide it all the way down to disaster, despair, chaos. If you start going down this way, and where the government is paying for all of your medical bills, national health care, it's going to grow and grow, and then finally we're going to lead into socialism and then communism. And that's an argument you hear in my country. And it's not true necessarily. Going a little bit in this way is not going to lead necessarily to disaster, and you haven't, especially when you don't have any logical reason for doing so. Finally, false analogies. So analogies can be helpful for illustrating points, but not necessarily for proving points. Here's one that always annoys me. People say, something bad happens to you, and someone says, well, if life gives you lemons, just make lemonade out of it. Okay, that's kind of true, but you're kind of insulting the person who's maybe in a bad situation, and you're kind of saying, oh, just accept it, when it's maybe something wrong has been done to the person that needs to be addressed. And it's avoiding actually the real question or the real issue here. False analogies don't really answer problems, kind of a way of avoiding problems, kind of a distraction. Okay, we'll stop there. Next we'll talk about lexical or semantic fallacies. Okay, next we have semantic or lexical fallacies, that is playing with words and word meanings. So the first category is euphemism. Now, euphemism is often used in general in language, and euphemism itself is not necessarily a logical fallacy. For example, if a person dies, well, if you want to be polite, like if it's one of your relatives, you say, oh, she passed away. It's a softer way of saying she died. It's less direct, less offensive. And we use euphemism a lot, especially in formal language or polite language. But it can also be used as a logical fallacy in order to hide the truth. So, for example, if the U.S. Pentagon conducted an operation in Iraq and some civilians were killed, innocent people were killed, instead of saying that innocent civilians were killed, like they will speak of collateral losses or incidental losses or something like that, instead of saying killed and innocent or civilian. So Euphemism can occasionally be used to avoid the truth, not just to soften it. Jargon. So jargon refers to language that's unique to a particular field, misuse of jargon. So maybe trying to make a weak argument sound better by just throwing in a bunch of impressive vocabulary. Good example, there's a guy named, was it Deepak Chopra, I think is his name. He is kind of this new age doctor. He does have a medical background, but he makes a lot of money and sells books by promoting his kind of new age faith healing kind of, I don't want to say philosophy, but his method. And whenever he talks about it in public, he throws in a lot of academic vocabulary, medical vocabulary, and also vocabulary from physics, from science that has nothing to do with what he's talking about, in order to promote his spiritual healing program. And scientists will listen to him and say he has no idea what he's talking about. He throws in scientific words and misuses them to sound impressive, and he uses it to mislead the public. Equivocation, or playing with word meanings. I mentioned Bill Clinton in the previous video. He's famous for this in certain cases. He was generally honest, but one time he got caught having an affair with a female staff person, a White House staff person, an intern. And here he equivocated a lot. He was playing with word meanings. So he went on national TV and he looked directly at the camera and he said, "I did not have sex with that woman." Well, he was playing with kind of definitions of sex, saying, well, what they did was not really sex, and okay, it was still sexual. And then he was questioned by a lawyer, and he equivocated in several ways again. He would say, "Were you alone with Ms. Lewinsky? Were you ever alone with her?" And he would say, "Well, it depends on how you define alone," and things like that. Things that were just so dishonest. And that's when a lot of people lost respect for Bill Clinton, obviously. And I still respect him as a president, but he lied to us when it came to his affair with a female intern. He was using equivocation in order to lie to us and to a lawyer, and no wonder he got into big trouble for that. Another example, someone who doesn't believe in evolution, they say, "Oh, evolution is just a theory, it hasn't been proven." They're playing with definitions of what theory is. In science, theory does not mean, oh, it's something that's not been proven. It's just a guess or conjecture. In everyday English, maybe theory means, oh, your guess. My theory is that my English professor must be an alien because he's kind of odd. In science, that's not what the word means. It means something different. The theory of evolution is something that scientists accept as a fact. It's still called a theory because it is a complex explanation. So a complex set of ideas that explain something. In science, that's what the word theory means. And there are many theories in science that have been proven true. Einstein's theories of relativity, for example. Einstein's theories have been proven true again and again. We still call them theories because they are kind of complex sets of ideas that explain something about the universe. Evolution explains things about the natural world. Hyperbole is simply exaggeration using exaggerated words. Some commercial advertisements might use exaggeration, for example. Tautology is kind of like a circular statement. It's kind of similar. We talked about circular questions. This is a circular statement. If we don't succeed, we're going to fail. Finally, weasel words. So weasel is a kind of animal which we associate with kind of lying or dishonesty or bad moral character, because these animals are kind of, I guess, not nice to have around. They like to maybe steal things, or they're kind of really sneaky and such. So when somebody is presenting ideas that are doubtful or questionable or not proven, they're trying to make them sound like they're valid, they will use weasel words, that are words that are kind of dishonestly quoting or referring to, maybe some sources or authorities. Many scientists agree that this will make you feel better, or some scientists agree that this will make you feel better. What scientist? Which scientist? Can you cite them? Who? They can't. At least they can't really cite real, valid scientists or medical experts. They don't have specific credible scientists, maybe a few who are not so credible or reliable. Many linguists will claim that Eskimos have 100 words for snow, when it's not true. A few linguists might claim that because they don't know, they haven't examined the actual research data, or they're not real linguists, or they're not qualified to speak on that particular linguistic issue. So they're not maybe fully trained linguists, or they're not qualified. So those are weasel words, kind of dishonestly claiming that somebody can back up your arguments, kind of dishonest citation of sources, dishonest use of authority, this kind of misrepresenting the validity of your claim or the reliability of your claim. For example, by saying that there is evidence or there are scholars who support this idea when there aren't. Okay, we're going to take a break, and next we're going to look at what I call empirical fallacies or problems with evidence.